Hi everyone, this is Anthony O'Flynn coming to you live from the Sunshine Coast. So congratulations to all the people in Australia and around the world for that matter who are speaking out, finding their voice and taking a stand for what they know in their heart to be right. And it really is much needed. Here in Australia, we're going through, in my view at least, the biggest crisis that we've ever seen in our history. And that crisis has nothing to do with health. It is basically a crisis of government accountability, of freedom, of civil rights, of liberties, of abuses of human rights that are ongoing, and we are definitely in a crisis which is now being internationally recognised. If you're unaware, some Republican politicians actually called for sanctions against Australia, which something even 2 years ago you would have thought of as being unheard of. Not only that, there's actually been politicians from Poland speaking out about the abuses of human rights and the communism that's attempted to be introduced into Australia. And really, when we think about the number of Australian politicians speaking out of the abuses of human rights that's ongoing in Australia today and every day, it's quite unbelievable that we have these elected public servants who are completely not representing the people at state and federal levels of government, and there doesn't seem to be any question of ethics or integrity being called into question for so many of these people. And yet they are paid by us through our tax dollars, paid to represent our values, our beliefs, our Australian way of life. And one thing that has become clear from this crisis is that this is a complete systemic failure. And in many ways, depending on how you look at it, it's actually one of the best things that could have ever happened to this nation, and one of the most necessary things, because it has shaken the Australian people from their slumber. It has shaken the Australian people from the idea of she'll be right, mate, and that everything's going to be okay. We're pretty far from okay here in Australia as things are going into October 2021. So the big news recently is Gladys's resignation due to the ICAC investigation into her conduct, which was perhaps and most likely arranged several weeks ago, with her not being present at her daily press conferences and so on. Now, a lot of people are saying that's great news, that's justice, and goodbye Gladys, and are very happy about it. In my view, that makes no difference, because Gladys is really having quite a lot of her job description is really just being a sales rep for Big Pharma. I mean, we've never seen in the history of our country any politicians supporting corporate, any form of corporations the way these politicians daily, relentlessly are supporting the Big Pharma. There's even signs, those big signs that you see on the roads, the digital signs saying go in and get your medicine, if you know what I mean. So, however, this means that the baton is passed to a new front person, a new puppet, but the agenda is continued, and the same agenda goes forward. And the elite are very sophisticated in the way that they use the psychological tactics of channeling all people's frustration, ill will, resentment towards these front men or front women, because that's exactly what they want you to do, because they want to be the puppeteers that are in the background, and people don't understand that they're the ones pulling the strings. It's a really simple question to ask, well, follow the money. Where does the money lead? The agenda that's being played out is also an ideological one in terms of attempting to introduce communism to Australia, but it's also a corporate one in terms of money, and also there are other nefarious aspects to this, of course, which I won't go into now, but it's also a financial operation. Perfect Product is one that everyone should take, every man, woman and child, And not only that, you have to have booster shots for every 6 months. You couldn't come up with a better business model than that. So really what's to understand here is that the baton is passed, the agenda goes forward, and the front woman or the front man just changes to a new person. And this is very convenient and very strategic because it always shifts attention to a new player and also gives the illusion of hope or the illusion of change or the illusion that this person will be more credible, have more integrity, be a voice for the people, which is always a lie. Gladys was actually a member of parliament since 2003. You don't actually get to be at the top of that tree in terms of being the premier of a state government unless you play along, unless the people who are behind the scenes, the power brokers, have got you in their pocket 100% that you will do and say exactly what they want you to do. You don't just simply get to become Premier of New South Wales. It's the state with the biggest economy, obviously, the biggest population, unless you are part of the team. So anyone who is thinking whatever sales rep the big pharma is going to pick for the New South Wales Premier that's going to be any different to the agenda that's gone forward up until now is completely having a very limited perspective on how politics in Australia works out. However, this has been a good thing for two major reasons. First one is that when any Premier at that level has to resign, basically under a cloud or an investigation of corruption, it does shake a number of people's faith in the system, which means that they have less credibility and they distrust the system overall, which is good because they start to question the credibility of the politicians and particularly all the total propaganda that the mainstream media is basically churning out on a daily basis here in Australia and around the world. The second thing is this, which is the most important thing, is that this power dynamic as it shifts, it creates instability for the elite. They don't like that. They don't like everything to be accounted for and covered and controlled. And by this, I mean that this is now a very big opportunity for the Australian people who are still under the hypnosis that the government is there to serve them and the government is for their good, to actually realise with this changing of a new Premier coming in that there will be something, that the agenda will go forward. So it wasn't all about Gladys and it wasn't all about her policies and her regime. So this means that the outcome of this changing of leadership in the New South Wales will actually force or direct many people to question the narrative, to question the mainstream consensus reality, and particularly question this complete ridiculousness of this so-called pandemic that it's going, of course, around the world, but here in Australia. Because the new person will come in and continue to do the same agenda as what Gladys has been doing. Now, many of you watching will think, oh, it's very obvious and so on. I get all that. Yeah, you guys do. But now we can see that the wave of awakening is spreading through the suffering, and the suffering will continue through this changing into a new leader. And people will see that eventually it doesn't matter whether it's Liberal, whether it's Labor, whether it's Gladys, whether it's the new leader, if it's the deputy one that becomes the Premier. It makes no difference actually at this level. So this is actually a positive thing, which we'll see what happens as it goes forward. But it will definitely be something that some people at least will see what is happening here. So really what we need to understand is that this thing will only change when we pull this weed out by the root. That this coalition of the ALP, LNP that's been going on, supported by the preferential voting system, is the only way to actually change this total corruption, this lack of integrity, this tyranny that has been fostered on the Australian people. And you will see now that, as I've been saying for quite a long time, I use the analogy of the concentric waves like ripples in a pond expanding, touching more and more people. And we can see particularly with the the mandatory magic potion, the medication, that now more and more people are getting affected, and therefore more and more people are actually starting to speak out. So in the beginning, people were not that concerned, but because it's affecting more people now, the Australian people are under such incredible pressure that now more and more people are really realising that there is a huge crisis occurring, and the crisis is actually occurring in their own life. Because previously, it was someone else lost their job because of the lockdowns, because of the border closures. Now that's happening to all kinds of different groups of workers. It was another state that got locked down. It was the Victorians and the people in Melbourne that were locked down. It wasn't anywhere else. So, it wasn't really affecting us. But now that's changes. Someone else was getting divorced. Someone else's relationship was breaking down. It was someone else's friend that suicided. It was someone else's co-worker that suicided. It was someone else's child that was seeing a psychologist because of the mental health issue around not being able to go to school and having all these restrictions on sport or whatever their activities were. It was someone else that was living in a sexless marriage. You see, the whole plan of this agenda is to affect everybody, and up until fairly recently, so many people think that that they are going to escape by complying, by sort of hiding like a coward under a rock. Well, this is going way beyond the level it's even at now, and this is only really just the beginning. So people who are under the illusion that everything's going to go back to normal when they've had their magic potion are going to get an extremely abrupt understanding of the dynamic of the global power structure and the globalist agenda that's being implemented in Australia and all around the world, because this is actually only just beginning. And if you look at what's been going on for the last, well, you can argue at different levels from different perspectives, but definitely in the last 30, 40 years, really, going back to Nixon, going off the gold standard, however you want to view it from whatever level, this agenda has been very, very carefully orchestrated gradually to put all the pieces in place to implement this strategy, this whatever label you want to give to it, communism, global tyranny. It doesn't really make any difference. And yet some people still think that there's some sort of major health crisis. And people who are awakening are asking the question, how long is this going to go on for? Well, this is going to go on for as long as it takes for a critical mass of people to come to the understanding that there really isn't a lot left to lose, and that something needs to be done to hold these politicians accountable. Because in Australia, we're now experiencing the effects of apathy, of inertia, of this completely socially engineered belief that we shouldn't talk about politics at dinners and at social events and so on. We're now reaping the effects of not being engaged in the political process, of not in any way of holding the politicians accountable, of not signing petitions and sending them to the politicians, of not calling up our local member of parliament and voicing our concerns, of not expressing ourselves on social media about our political views and holding freedom and personal liberties as a high value. We are reaping the fruits of all of those traits of the Australian character, which personally I feel in this country we'd really not want to look at. We'd really like to live under the illusion that we're this very educated, high-functioning, very socially aware, we're not any of those things. And you can see that from this crisis that has emerged. We are really, really struggling to come to the terms of the fact of what our national identity really is. And it's been very confronting, and it needs to be. Because this of what's going on now is actually the Australian people's opportunity to become sovereign people, to mature and to grow at a way that we've never seen in our history. So personally, I welcome the opportunity, and I welcome the introspection of our national character, and I welcome identifying our weak spots, because we have a lot of great strengths. It's a great country. I don't want to live anywhere else. I love living in Australia. It's been a huge gift to be born here. But we are now reaping the effects of our total political apathy. And if we continue to remain apathetic, then the repercussions of this will only continue to intensify. Now, we can turn this around, and I'm totally confident we will turn this around, but it's only up to one person to do that, and that person is you, because no one is coming to save us. No one will ever come and change this political dynamic, this coalition of the LNP and the ALP. They have simply created this hidden hand, this invisible force to control Australian society through political, social, economic means, and will perpetuate this for as long as it goes on. So when people say, how long is this going to go on for? Well, there's no calculation in linear time that this can actually continue for, but this will continue until we reach critical mass, where people decide that enough is enough, stand up to this tyranny and start to live from values which are perhaps being ignored or perhaps dormant, and stand up for future generations, for our families, for our rights, for our beliefs, and all the things that we have taken for granted, which has been a great part of the Australian character. But we can see that this journey has taken us into a place where all of a sudden these tyrannical politicians, these unelected bureaucrats, this complicit propaganda of the mainstream media, this trinity of these three aspects of our life have basically hijacked the narrative of how we should live, if we should go to work or not, if we can cross state borders, violations of human rights, doing mandates that are unconstitutional, and in the same time completely destroying the national fabric of Australia. And it's really come to the point now where this crisis, it can't go anywhere. But it can't go anywhere. It's like this awakening must happen. And this is my point that I'm making here, is that when we look into the national character now, because we've never had to fight really hard for anything on Australian soil, and I'm talking about since the arrival of the First Fleet. I'm not going back into that that far back in history. Sure, we've been involved in international conflict. We have been involved in international wars and so on. And I'm not saying people haven't struggled with their own challenges, whether it's mental health or financially or anything. But this is a nation. And our political system is based on what can be referred to as the Westminster mutation, which for historical means was perhaps necessary, that we had this fusion of the federalism of the states, of the United States of America, and the also taking into aspects the Westminster system. Now, we can see the national fabric of Australia is still a Commonwealth country. The Queen of England is still the head of state here in Australia, which is perhaps only symbolic, but it says a lot for us as far as how much we've matured and how much we've actually become truly independent of any other organisation, any other so-called royal family, any other foreign interference in how we run our country. And in many ways, this is most, or can be referred to as being particularly evident, is in the actual flag of Australia itself, which still today has the Union Jack on it. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that's a bad thing, but it's a reference to the fact that very deep in our psyche, which is perhaps even unconscious, the collective consciousness in Australia still identifies with England as being our kind of our parent. So we have this kind of toxic relationship with the parental structure of actually who we are as a national identity, which is a little bit complex, but I'll go into that in more detail, because really where we're at now in the history of our nation, I see it as an opportunity for us to actually become much more politically engaged, to develop a much better representative political system, to become much more aware of relevant political issues, to understand the systemic control that is being implemented in our lives in many ways that people wouldn't even begin to think is really actually occurring because of this hidden hand, this invisible hand of power, and also to consider the way forward of what our legacy will be, what we'll leave for future generations. So this pivotal moment in Australian history is really where people get to stand up, people get to find out who they really are, what they really believe in, and what they're prepared to do in terms of returning to a much more freer society where we hold these politicians accountable, where they actually serve us, the people, instead of these completely diabolical tyrants that really just seem to go from one crisis to another, where they don't seem to be held accountable in any way by the media. For example, currently in Queensland, you can have 20 people dancing at a wedding, and yet tomorrow night at the rugby grand final, there'll be over 40,000 people attending. I mean, they make a complete mockery of their own fake pandemic with their own fake mandatory rules and regulations. It's nothing but an exercise in propaganda, in behaviour modification, in social engineering, in adopting some kind of untested, unproven medication, and also to coerce people into accepting the government as having a bigger role in their life than what we believe as a people they should have in the first place. And that really, in many ways, is the fundamental issue that we're facing here today, is the government having what can be referred to as big government, but also a tyrannical, abusive, overreach, complete justification of interfering in our lives in ways that we do not consent to, we do not agree to, and the politicians have no mandate for this. They have no justification. They have no warrant from the people for this. But until we start to hold the politicians accountable, until there is a greater level of ministerial accountability, this will continue. And we're seeing it actually increase day by day with what we're seeing here. So this rite of passage that we are experiencing here is really a wonderful opportunity. I see it as a way to strengthen the national character, to develop qualities that perhaps we are latent to or dormant of, and to also start to really have a greater vision for our country, for our way of life, and for our political system. And when people say, how can anyone still believe this ridiculousness of what's going on with the mainstream media and these politicians? Well, a lot of people still do. A lot of people are completely hopelessly indoctrinated and basically believe whatever the TV tells them. I mean, it's simply the way it is currently. So because of this, expect the scandals to intensify, expect the abuse of power to intensify in the short term, and expect there to be also a radical awakening as these ripples start to expand out and affect more and more people. Because this is a one-way ticket. This great awakening, this global awakening cannot be stopped. It cannot be stopped. The concern I have is how much collateral damage there will be along the way, and how many people will be affected in all the various ways I've outlined, whether it's their mental health, the breakdown of their relationship, the loss of their business, the foreclosure of their mortgage, the inability for them to cross borders for medical treatment, for them to not be able to meet with their family who live interstate, for them to not be able to attend funerals or weddings, and all the things that we've seen. And for my part, I don't want to see anyone suffer, but it's well known in spirituality and in personal growth that suffering is often the catalyst for our greatest growth. And that's what we're seeing currently in Australia now, because so many people are being so radically affected by this completely unnecessary regulation and interference in our life by the government. And when people say it's because of the Rona, it's not because of the Rona, it's because of the government. And it's absolutely fantastic to see some of these professions starting to find their voice, whether it's the nurses, the teachers, the police, and the tradies, of course, as well. So I think that we will turn things around. I've made other comments of the time frames in other videos I've given on that. You can check those out. But at the equinox, I did make the comment. I'd studied the tables and the statistics very detailed. The rollout of the magic potion in Australia compared to the other OECD countries is a complete failure. And by that I mean that we are third lowest, at least we were at the equinox in the OECD countries. We were just below us. In second last place was New Zealand, and then Mexico, which was a little bit further. So all those other countries, all 38 countries in the OECD, we were the third lowest with the two doses of the magic potion. So this is why there is a vacancy for a sales rep for Big Pharma as in the New South Wales government, because people haven't been meeting their KPIs, their key performance indicators, haven't been meeting their sales targets, and the word's getting out. I mean, really, more and more people are coming forward. It's really only a matter of time. The dam is breaking, the illusion is ending, the hypnosis is fading. The people are simply not buying this ridiculous hysteria of this fake narrative that's perpetuated by the mainstream media anymore. And plenty more to say on this, but really happy to see that people in Australia are speaking out. We are also facing our shadow, as I said earlier, our collective shadow, and finding out who we really are and what's really inside. And I think we'll turn things around, and in time we'll make the Anzacs proud. But that's a journey that we are on, and we could eventually actually lead the global awakening, because we are under so much pressure. We are under so much tyranny here, and we are making news all around the world because of this. And it is leading a lot of people to really question what happened to Australia. But I do honestly in my heart believe we'll turn it around. So thanks for watching, everyone. Just stay strong. As I've been saying for a while now, they will break. They will back down because they do not have the numbers. The statistics show it. I don't believe any of the statistics that are actually being distributed in regard to this, because I have no reason to believe pathological lies in any circumstances. But I do believe that they are breaking. There is a lot of confusion inside. There is a lot of terror. My energetic read on Scotty from marketing the worst Prime Minister that we've ever had in the history in this great country is this man is actually completely terrified with what's going on at the moment. He is genuinely terrified, and he's only got till about May to have the federal election next year. So his political career could be coming to an abrupt end if the globalists choose not to support him through the media for the federal election. Then he is finished. And he is genuinely terrified, as are a number of the leaders, because they are facing so much opposition now, whether it's legal opposition from the paramedics, from the medical fraternity, from the police force, from the teachers, from the tradies, from the various activists who around Australia, around the world, who have been calling this out from the very start. And really, your everyday person is now genuinely starting to question the narrative. There is, of course, a certain percentage, as I mentioned, that just don't understand what's happening. Forget about them. You're never going to be able to change their mind. That's just how it's going to be. But the critical mass we are approaching, and I'm very optimistic in the long term. It's going to be a bumpy ride, but stay strong and understand that they are going to capitulate, even if it doesn't appear like it. The tide is gradually turning. Thanks for watching. We live in epic times.